Hey, welcome to Virkadia. I'm Joey, the designer behind all of our patterns, the most popular of which are our Amigurumi patterns, which are free to read on our blog at Virkadian.com, or you can purchase ad-free PDF downloads of those same patterns in our shop. Today we're going to be going over some tips and tricks to add to your next Virkadia pattern, including 3 different ways to start your Amigurumi project: the magic ring, the 4-chain ring, and the 2-chain ring. We'll also be going over some alternative stitch techniques, including how to do the yarn under, yarn over method for single crochets. This produces a slightly tighter stitch than traditional single crochets, which is great for amigurumi because it really helps with the shaping of your piece, as well as preventing any stuffing from showing through between your stitches. We will also be going over how to do an invisible decrease, which is a decrease stitch that just blends in more seamlessly with the rest of your stitches. We will also go over every step you need to know in order to add a face onto your amigurumi, including how to attach the safety eyes, how to embroider the mouth, and how to add little blush spots. And lastly, we will go over some other special skills that you can add into your next project, including how to join rounds in the Virkadian method, which just creates a nicer seam between your rounds, as well as how to stagger increases and how to sew your project closed at the end. If you enjoy this video, please consider subscribing to our channel or following us on social media, where you can stay up to date with everything happening in Virkadia, including when we add new free patterns. And thank you so much to everyone who continues to support Virkadia. Your viewership and engagement allows us to keep creating new free content for everybody. So without further ado, let's just get right into it. For this video, we are going to be practicing all of these techniques by just making a simple round ball shape with a face. If you already have one of our patterns chosen, you should obviously refer to the supply list for that specific pattern, but if you are just following along with this video to learn the techniques, here's what you're going to need. A 5mm crochet hook, which will work for both the normal version that I'm making, but will also work if you would like to practice making a chunky version out of super bulky chenille yarn instead. You will also need a pair of scissors, a yarn needle large enough to fit your chosen yarn through, a stitch marker for securing your working loop when necessary, 2 10mm black safety eyes for the normal version, and black embroidery floss for the mouth. You will also need polyester fiberfill or another material for stuffing your piece. Your chosen yarn, which for this tutorial is going to be Big Twist Value yarn in color Bubblegum, which is a medium 4-weight yarn, and you will also need a second yarn color for your blush, or you may also use embroidery floss instead. Alternatively, for the chunky version I mentioned earlier, you can use Premier Parfait chunky yarn. This one is in color Poppy, which is a super bulky 6-weight yarn. All other materials for the chunky version remain the same, except that you'll need 2 strands of your embroidery floss for the mouth, and you'll need slightly bigger 14mm safety eyes. And of course, you'll need your second color for the blush embroidery. I recommend Premier Parfait Chunky in the color Pink Lemonade. Okay, let's get started. When working in the round, using a magic ring is going to give you the best results, since it can be pulled tight and won't leave you with a gaping hole in the center. However, the magic ring can be tricky to learn, so if you get frustrated or are looking for a simpler alternative, you can skip ahead to the slipknot tutorial and then choose from the 4-chain or the 2-chain ring starting methods instead. Start with the tail end of your yarn facing down and the skein end facing up. Lay your yarn across the inside of your fingers and use your thumb to secure the end of your yarn at the bottom of your hand like so. Then wrap your yarn up and over the back of your hand and then down around to the inside of your hand again, next to the beginning tail but closer to the tips of your fingers. Then you're going to cross your yarn over the beginning strand in an X shape, and then wrap it across the back of your hand one more time, this time closer to your wrist. Wrap it back to the inside once more and use your thumb to keep this end of your yarn secure too. Once it's secure, drop your yarn and turn your hand over. You should now have 2 parallel lines across your fingers. Insert your hook beneath the first strand that is closer to the tips of your fingers and grab onto the second strand of yarn. Gently pull it through, then turn your hook so that it is pointing downwards and twist the point of your hook up and over the bottom of that strand so that you now have a loop on your hook. Hold the loop on your hook with your finger and grab the strand at the top that is closer to your wrist, not the strand that you first inserted your hook under, and pull it through the loop on your hook. This can be a little tricky if you pulled your loop too tight, So if you have trouble, try loosening your tension a little or twisting the head of your hook downward as you pull through. Then carefully remove your fingers, and I like to tighten this slip knot just a little bit. This isn't strictly necessary, but it is a bit of foreshadowing for how we are going to be joining our rounds later. Locate that beginning tail and just untwist it from the rest of the circle and pull the skein end of your yarn to readjust the loop on your hook if need be. Now we should have this nice big circle and your beginning tail should be pointing towards your non-dominant hand. We are going to work our first round into this ring, but first we need a little bit of tension in order to do that. So insert your bottom 3 fingers into the circle and then use your thumb on the other side of the yarn to hold the strands of both the circle and the beginning tail together and pull them taut across. Be sure to keep watching through to the end of the next section to see how we finish off this magic circle. Now that we are ready for our first round, we are going to go over our variation of the single crochet stitch, referred to as the yarn under, yarn over method. Normally with a single crochet, you would insert your hook into the ring or next stitch, then yarn over your hook and pull through. We are not going to do this. Instead, we are going to do what is called a yarn under, which means we are wrapping our yarn under the hook instead of over, like so. We then pull through so that there are 2 loops on our hook. Then yarn over and pull through both loops just like we normally would. So let me show you that again. Insert your hook into the ring and yarn under. In other words, the skein end of your yarn should start at the bottom side of your hook, then wrap upwards and over the top of your hook. Then pull through. Yarn over and pull through like normal. Now this is feeling a little clumsy even for me, so let me show you another way I like to do this method. Insert your hook again, but this time we are not actually going to wrap the yarn. Instead, we are going to do what I like to think of as the hungry hippo bite. So instead of actually wrapping the yarn around the hook, we are just going to plop our hook down on top of the yarn and then yank it out. It also kind of reminds me of when something rolls under a big piece of furniture and you have to get down on the floor and reach your hand underneath and drag it out. Okay, so you're probably asking, why are we even doing this? Well, yarning under on the first pass makes your stitch tighter, which has several benefits. For one, it leads to smaller holes between stitches, so less chance of your stuffing poking through. Tighter stitches also means better shaping, and most importantly, less stitch slanting. This method is completely optional, so do what ultimately feels best for you, but I do highly recommend giving this method some practice, especially for those patterns where stitch slanting is a nuisance. To close a magic ring, I first like to pull my ring taut and then manually scrunch my stitches down. I found the end result to be a bit more consistent when I do this. Then find your beginning tail and pull it firmly until the ring is fully closed and your stitches should curve into a circle. And you want to make sure your tail is in the back before you join your round. Find the very first stitch you worked in round 1 and work a slip stitch into the top of that stitch to join your round. It might be a little tight, as you can see. Also, make sure when you are joining that you are yarning over with your skein end for your slip stitch, not the beginning tail. You can see here that I'm pulling the slip stitch tight after I finish it, and I'll be doing that with the next chain stitch as well. We're going to be going over why I do this a little later during the join rounds tutorial, so stay tuned for that. But first, now that we are finished with round 1, we need to finish off our magic circle. You can give that tail another tug to make sure the center ring is nice and tight. Just be careful if you're using a more delicate yarn that you don't accidentally snap your strand. Then you're going to remove your hook and flip your work over. Now we want to make sure this magic ring will stay closed and not come undone later. The way I like to do this is to just make a nice fat knot on the back with my leftover tail, so there is no way it can slip back through the stitches. And this is fine enough for most pieces, since this side of your crochet is going to be hidden on the interior of your project anyway. But if you're doing something like a motif that can be viewed from both sides, then you would want to do something less visually offensive. You could either use a needle and sew your tail through some more stitches until it is more secure, or you could thread it up through your slip stitch and then crochet over top of it during your next round. Either way, once you are confident that your tail won't be pulled loose, cut any excess, return your hook to its loop, and you are ready for round 2. If you are looking for some easier ways to begin your project, keep watching and we will go over how to do a slip knot, the chain 4 ring, and the chain 2 ring. To do a chain 4 ring or a chain 2 ring, we must first start with a slip knot. For this, you'll start with the tail end of your yarn facing down and the skein end facing up. Thread the yarn between your pointer and middle fingers on your non-dominant hand and use those two fingers to clamp down on your yarn. Then pull the loose end of your yarn down over top of your thumb to create this top bridge between your pointer finger and thumb. Pull the yarn around to the palm side of your hand and use your ring and pinky finger to hold onto your tail so that everything stays in place. So now we are going to be working with this vertical strand that you have pulled taut here. To make a slip knot, you're going to slip your hook underneath this strand, away from your dominant hand. Lift it up gently like a tent and rotate the head of your hook downward so that it crosses up and over top of the lower part of the strand. Keep spinning it until it completes a full 360-degree turn around. To complete your slip knot, use the rest of the strand above the loop on your hook to yarn over. And you'll see that without dropping anything, I'm going to use my thumb to hold onto the yarn just below the loop and pull through. Finish it off by holding the new loop on your hook with your finger and pulling up on it until the slip knot is tight. And then pull back on your skein end to readjust your loop back around your hook. And you're done. The chain 4 ring is going to be the easiest starting method for most crocheters. We will start by chaining 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. After that, we are going to form a ring by slip stitching into the very first chain we made. Now the instinct will probably be to just work back into the top of that first chain, which you can do, but for even better results, you're going to manually curve your chain around so that it forms a circle. Make sure that beginning tail is out of the way, and you're going to work a slip stitch into the other side of that first chain, which was actually the bottom side of the chain when we were first looking at it. Again, make sure that beginning tail is out of the way. We want to be pulling from our skein end only. Yarn over and pull through both the chain and the loop on your hook to complete that slip stitch, then chain 1 before your next round. You'll notice I'm tightening that chain. More on that later when we go over joining rounds. And then when you're ready, work round 1 into the center hole right there between all 4 chains. If you skipped over the beginning sections going over the magic ring method, make sure you go back and watch the tutorial for the yarn under, yarn over method of single crochets, which is what we are doing here. It is optional, but I do highly recommend giving it a try. Once we reach the end here, slip stitch into the first stitch of the round to join and then chain 1. And now we have successfully started working on our project in the round, but you can see the hole in the center here is rather large. That is the trade-off with it being an easier method. Some people aren't bothered by it, but if you are, I will go over one more method to consider next. For the chain 2 ring, you guessed it, we are going to start by chaining 2. We are then going to skip the first chain right before our hook and work our entire first round into the second chain from our hook, or the very first chain we created. This is smaller to work into than our chain 4 ring, so you'll see I am using the beginning tail to grab onto to create the tension I need to be able to work into the chain. Since it's a little smaller and therefore more difficult to hold, the chain 2 ring can be just a smidge harder than the chain 4 ring, but it is still easier to figure out than the magic ring, so it's a great compromise to consider between the two other options. We'll finish off the whole round using the yarn under, yarn over method for our single crochets, just as before. And as always, slip stitch into the first stitch at the end to join and then chain 1. And you'll see at the end here, the hole is still there, so not as perfect as the magic ring, but at the same time it is a noticeable improvement on the chain 4 ring. No matter which starting method you chose, make sure you trim your beginning tail before continuing. Not too short that anything will fall apart though. We're going to work round 2 really quickly here so that I can show you how we join rounds at the end. A few quick notes here. Unless otherwise stated, your next round will always begin in the same stitch as your previous slip stitch has been worked into. Some people can get a little confused when the instructions for a new round begin with next stitch instead of same stitch for that first stitch. But the only time you should ever be skipping a stitch is if the pattern specifically calls for you to skip a stitch. Now is also a great time to note that the side of your stitches that are currently facing you as you work right now is called the right side of your work. The other side is called the wrong side. As you complete your project, make sure the right side is always facing outwards, unless the pattern specifically calls for something else. Okay, we've got our round of 12 single crochets done. Now we need to locate our very first single crochet in the round and slip stitch into the top of that stitch to join the round. Here's where I do something that is a bit unique to our patterns. I'm going to hold my loop firmly on my hook and pull up until that slip stitch I've just made is tight. Then I just pull back on that skein end of my yarn to fit that loop back snugly around my hook. I'm going to repeat the same method of tightening my stitch on the next one or more chains as well. So this is obviously weird. Why am I doing this? Well, for one, it's going to make a visibly cleaner seam, but it also helps you to see more clearly which stitches still need to be worked into as you go around. Otherwise, it's harder to see the first stitch that needs worked into because you've already slip stitched into it, and it also helps you at the end of the round to not mistake that same slip stitch or the turning chain as stitches that still need to be worked into. Another way we get a nice seam on our project is by staggering our increases. Let's do round 3 as normal, and you'll see what I mean when we get to round 4. So for round 3, we will work 1 single crochet into our next stitch, and then 2 single crochets into the next stitch after that, also known as an increase. Now we will repeat that sequence all the way around. And there you can see an example of how this would be written out in one of our patterns. The part there that says 6 times is asking you to repeat that entire bracketed sequence directly preceding it a total of 6 times. As always, at the end here, we will slip stitch into the first stitch to join and then chain 1. It is now time to start staggering our increases. You don't need to figure this out on your own. All of our patterns will already be written out to include staggered increases, but I just want to demystify why we're doing this a little bit here. For round 4, what your average pattern would normally do here is work 1 single crochet into each of the next 2 stitches, and then add an increase into the 3rd stitch. We are not going to do that. Instead, we are going to reverse this sequence and work our increase first, then proceed with our normal stitches afterwards. We will repeat that reversed sequence all the way around. What this is going to do is keep our increases radiating outwards in straight lines instead of spiraling around and pushing our seam into a curved line. So we will start by working 2 single crochets, aka our increase, into our next stitch. Then work 1 single crochet into each of the next 2 stitches after that. And repeat that sequence 5 more times around. Like I said before, doing it this way is going to keep our increases fanning out in straight lines rather than in a spiral. This helps keep shapes consistent and ensures that different elements are lining up together vertically as they're intended to. Essentially, we are constructing our increases to be more like the angles of a perfectly sliced pie, radiating straight outwards from the center, giving us a nice straight joining seam since we are making sure our increases are zigzagging up both sides of the seam evenly. Now that our increases are starting to zigzag, you can already begin to see the benefits here. We should have a seam that is traveling straight outwards, and the rest of our round should be doing the same, instead of spiraling around. And if you're following our method of tightening stitches when you join rounds, you should be seeing a clean and subtle seam here, with no slip stitches or chains popping out or breaking up the pattern too much. With the slip stitches being pulled tight after each round, you also shouldn't be having any opportunity to squeeze in any extra stitches by mistake. And you should be able to see clearly where your first stitch of each round should be worked into. Next up, we're going to be going over how to add a face onto your amigurumi, but obviously we are going to need a little bit more surface area to work with first. If you're following along with this video just to practice the techniques, feel free to follow along with the practice pattern we are making, and I'll meet you back up here after round 13. Before we start adding the face, double check that the right side of your stitches are facing outwards. If we flip this wrong side out, you can see our beginning tail knotted up at the top there, and when we look at the stitches, you can see that each stitch has a small horizontal bar over the top. That is what we don't want to see. That means it is the wrong side. So let's flip that right side out again, because we are going to want to make sure that the right side is facing outwards before we begin adding the face. Before we start, gather up all the materials you are going to need for the face. You will need a pair of safety eyes. Again, for this yarn weight, we are using 10mm safety eyes. You will also need a needle for embroidering, a pair of scissors for cutting your yarn or thread. You will need black embroidery floss for the mouth, a single strand for medium weight yarn, or 2 held together for the chunky version. And lastly, your chosen yarn or embroidery floss for your blush spots. But first, let's start with the eyes. Quick note here that you should not use safety eyes if your piece is intended for a small child, since they can be a choking hazard. You would need to embroider them on instead. But for all other pieces, you're going to want to take your first eye and locate where you want the vertical center of your piece's face to be. Now, we are just working on a blank sphere with no discernible center. So for this part of the tutorial, I'm actually going to switch over to a model of our heart cutie so you can see a more practical example. So here we have the first 13 rounds of our heart cutie. Just like I said before, the first step is to find the vertical center of where you want your face to be. On this pattern, the center is right between these 2 domes at the top, and we can follow that seam straight down. Each pattern will state which rounds your eyes should be inserted between. For both the heart cutie and the practice sphere we are making, the eyes should be placed between the 9th and 10th rounds. So find your first round for the heart cutie, and you're going to count down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Find that seam between rounds 9 and 10 and follow that over to the point where it meets the vertical center of the face. Just make a mental note of where that is, then you're going to count 3 stitches back outwards. 1, 2, 3, and insert your eye into that space. Next, take your second eye and locate that middle space again between the 9th and 10th rounds and count 3 stitches outwards in the other direction. 1, 2, 3. And insert your second eye into that space. Double check that both eyes are between the 9th and 10th rounds and that they are 6 stitches apart and centered on the front of your piece. Then turn your piece inside out and add the backings to secure your safety eyes. Next, grab your black embroidery floss and your needle. Again, you'll want a normal strand for medium weight yarn, but 2 held together for the chunky version. I'd say about 8 inches or so is enough, but you can go a little longer if you want to be safe, especially for the chunky version. Okay, thread that through your needle, and first you'll want to locate where your left safety eye was inserted into. Not where the edge of the eye ends, but where the center spike on the back was inserted. Then count 1 round down and then 2 stitches to the right. Visually mark this spot and then insert your needle from inside to outside through this spot. Pull through and make sure to leave a little bit of tail on the inside for tying later. Then count 2 more stitches to the right, 1, 2, and insert your needle back in and pull through until you have a horizontal bar that is 2 stitches wide. Then count 1 stitch down and 1 stitch to the left from where you last inserted and pass your needle back out from inside to outside through this space and pull through. Next, you're going to want to pass your needle up and underneath this horizontal bar above, from bottom to top, and pull through. Then pass over the horizontal bar and insert your needle back into the same space that you last exited from. Remove your needle, and now as you pull the rest of your thread through to the inside of your piece, it should pull with it that horizontal bar, creating a V shape that becomes a little smile. You can then manually adjust it to your liking, making it more of a U shape than a V shape if you'd like, just like so. When you're happy with it, flip your piece over so that you can access the interior and tie both tails of your embroidery floss together on the inside of your piece. However, take care that you don't pull your threads too tightly as you do this. Try to knot them as gently as possible so that you don't distort the lines of your mouth. I like to do just a simple granny knot to start, and then just to make sure it's fully secure, I take both tails together, wrap them around my finger to make a loop, and pull both strands through to create another knot on top. You don't have to tie your ends the same way I do. Even I admit this is probably overkill. I just like the peace of mind knowing that everything is secure. No matter what method you use, just make sure that when you're done, that you cut any excess length left over above your knot. A lot of people's instinct is to just tuck in any extra length into the interior and be done with it, since trimming it is an added step. But I do highly recommend snipping that extra bit off. Otherwise, those tails could get pulled around on the inside later once you're adding your stuffing, which could create a dent in the surface of your piece. Next, grab your needle again, along with your chosen yarn or embroidery floss for your blush. I will be using yarn for this tutorial. Measure out your length of yarn or thread. I did about 8 inches again. And you'll be needing 2 strands total, 1 for each cheek. So you can go ahead and cut both at the same time if you want. Find the spot where the center of the right eye was inserted, and you're going to count 1 round down and 1 stitch to the right. Visually mark this spot, then insert your needle from inside to outside through this spot. Pull through and be sure to leave a little bit of tail on the inside for tying later. Then reinsert your needle 1 more stitch to the right and pull through. At this point you can stop, or you can repeat the same steps again to build up that blush a little bit more, especially if you're using something thinner like embroidery floss. For this practice piece, I'll repeat the steps 1 more time. So I'll find that first space, pass my needle from inside to outside, and pull through. Then insert back in 1 stitch to the right, pull through, and if you're satisfied with the size of your blush spot, you can go ahead and remove your needle, flip your piece over to the inside, and tie both tails of your yarn or floss together on the interior of your piece. Just as with the mouth, take care that you don't pull your threads too tightly as you do this. I'm once again doing my double knot to make sure it's secure, and then cutting any excess length left over above the knot just as before. And that completes our first blush spot. Mirroring what we just did on the other side, go 1 round down and 1 stitch to the left from the center of the left eye and pass your needle from inside to outside through this spot. Pull through and be sure to leave a little bit of tail on the inside. Then reinsert your needle 1 more stitch to the left and pull through. Repeat these steps as many times as desired. For us, that'll be 1 more time. Then turn your piece over and tie both tails of your yarn or floss together on the inside of your project. And lastly, cut any excess length. This is what your finished face should look like now. You can remove your stitch marker and return your hook into your piece. Then at this point of each project is generally when we start the decreasing rounds of our pattern. So if we were starting a normal decrease, we would insert into the next stitch, yarn over, and pull through, then repeat that again on the second stitch. For an invisible decrease, we are not going to do that. Instead, we are going to insert our hook into the front loop only of our next stitch so that we have our original loop plus this front loop only from our next stitch on our hook. Then we are going to go through the front loop only of the following stitch in the exact same way. So now we have our original loop and 2 front loops from 2 different stitches on our hook. In the next step, we would normally yarn over, but don't forget that we have been doing the yarn under, yarn over method, so that applies to our decrease as well. We are going to yarn under, then pull through both of those front loops only. Yarn over and pull through both loops on your hook, and you have completed your first invisible decrease. This round has you working a decrease followed by 1 single crochet into each of the next 8 stitches. So let's finish that sequence and then I'll show you how to do that invisible decrease again. Okay, so it's time for our next decrease. It can be kind of tight getting through those front loops only, so watch me here and you'll notice I'm sort of corkscrewing my hook through those 2 loops. This makes it a little easier in my opinion. So rather than trying to fight against the tension of those loops, I'm instead just twisting the tip of my hook underneath the front loops and spinning inside. Make sure you are entering through both front loops the exact same way, from front to back only. It takes a bit of getting used to, but the invisible decrease blends in much better than your standard decrease. And since it is a tighter stitch, it also helps with better shaping too. If you truly hate it, it is totally optional, just like most of these methods. But let's finish off this round and I'll show you what it looks like. Ta-da! Look at that seamless round. You can hardly even see where the decreases are. They blend in so nicely. The last tutorial we have to do is showing you how to sew your piece closed, but first we have to finish the rest of our shape. If you're following along with the practice pattern, here are the instructions for the last few rounds. At this point you should be stuffing as you go, and I usually just add a little bit more stuffing every few rounds until the very end. In general, you should be filling it up enough that the shape is well rounded out, but not stretching it to the point that your stuffing is starting to show through your stitches. Okay, we are coming up on our last stitch here. As always, you want to join your last round with a slip stitch into the first stitch of the round. But for this last round, we are not going to chain 1. Instead, we are going to remove our hook and we are going to cut our yarn about a foot or so away from our piece and pull that yarn completely through the top of our last stitch. You should now be fastened off with this long tail left over on the bottom of your piece. Take this tail and thread it through your needle, and now we will be using our end tail to sew up this bottom hole. To do this, we are going to be passing our needle through the front loop only from bottom to top of each stitch around. We have 6 stitches in our last round, so that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Then we are going to hold the bottom of our piece and pull on our tail nice and firm, and our bottom hole should close up tight. This is what it should look like now. I also like to sew back into the first front loop in the round one more time just for good measure. Then locate any spot nearby, the more hidden the better, and knot your tail firmly and securely enough that it won't unravel later. I like to add a few knots on top just to be safe. This part is going to get yanked inside the piece, so it's totally fine if it's a bit bulky. Then in that same spot, or as close as possible, insert your needle directly through your piece and then out again somewhere else on your piece that is reasonably far away. Keep pulling until your knot that you've made pops into the inside of your piece and out of sight. Remove your needle and then, without accidentally cutting the piece itself, snip that tail as close to the surface as you can manage. You can then use your scissors or a needle to poke any remaining tail back into the interior, and your piece is now fully closed up and finished. And that's going to be it for this video. If you liked this content, please consider subscribing to our channel or following us on social media. That way you can stay up to date with all of our new pattern releases and other crochet content. And I hope to see you back in Virkadia soon. Bye.